Thanks for joining, everybody. My name is Tim Sarnacki. I'm one of the security engineers here at EVOTEK. I've been in specifically the security space for about 8 years, but before that, just any and all IT functions, kind of jack of all trades sort of thing. And Jacob?
Master of several, if by my account. But
Right.
like Tim, I cut my teeth on the IT side of the house, and you kind of accident your way into cybersecurity because you're the one who made the mistake of saying, "Hey, I understand how this firewall works," or "Hey, I noticed this patch will fix this issue." So somewhere between IT and cybersecurity, I'm coming up on 20 years here. If any of you saw my last session, pardon me for repeating, but done CISO work across numerous industries, government, education, manufacturing, hospitality, healthcare with Tim for quite a few years. And throughout many of those ventures have done vulnerability management programs in just about every one of them. So when it comes to handling vulnerability management programs, and the woes that begot such programs. There's quite a bit of understanding there. So Tim, hopefully we can jump into some of that content today.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the big piece of it is the the building it out from the engineering side. It's
Mm.
there's complex functions and integrations there, but also the leadership side where I might not have that exposure to needing to sit down with the board and work
Sure.
through sharing those challenges that the teams are facing. And Jacob, you definitely have gone through that and lived it. And
Through the wash a couple times, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and you don't have quite as many gray hairs as me. So
Yeah, I don't know. The beard's getting a little gray these days. I don't
right,
know. Coming up
yeah,
quick.
yeah. Yeah, so to really kind of start the conversation on this, different companies have different kind of maturity levels of a vulnerability management process. Kind of focusing this on, I don't know, small to mid level, but all of these challenges do come up even for very mature uh, environments, right? So
More
the
so,
the
as you get more players in the field, the fog of war gets a little bit thicker, right?
yeah, exactly. So the big piece of it is you might have a tool to run vulnerability assessments. You might not have a tool, and you're kind of um, pulling reports from systems. But with that information, the biggest bit of information or advice that I can give is to do something with it. Can't just sit on like the knowledge that it's there. It might be you're sending people out to manually patch systems, or you're helping direct traffic. But once you have that knowledge that the vulnerability exists or a configuration problem exists, you have to do something. Um, it does get a lot more complicated than that. You can't just, I don't know, run around with the chicken your head cut off, but you do have to do something with that information.
Yeah, and like our last discussion, the notion of vulnerability patch management, it's not binary. You're not doing it or not doing it. There's varying degrees along the way. Well, I suppose there can be in its simplest form not doing it. I've worked for some pretty crazy organizations where they're just not doing anything in that space. But I think even in organizations that are not focused on the vulnerability side of things, they're even focused on the patching side of things. As you think about the CIA triad, many of us are familiar with confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Applying patches that are not necessarily security focused, but maybe are related to system stability, even touches on the availability component of what we're looking at from a cybersecurity picture. And maybe you have auto update turned on, and your Linux Unix distributions are auto compiling those things, or your Windows systems are using auto update from Windows Update Services to apply some of those things. Even in those circumstances, it's not well governed, it's not well controlled. You might get a system that flops when it downloads a bad patch or something, and you've done some customization to that system that it doesn't jive well with. They're doing something, and to your point, the do something part of it, the not getting stuck in analysis paralysis piece is great. And sometimes it can mean that folks are stepping outside of their roles. You know, there's an ideological state where the security guys are looking up the stuff on NVD. They're sending CVEs out to the IT team. The IT folks are ingesting that, determining what applies, applying patches. They're sending nice emails back to the security guys that say, "Hey, I patched this. Can you scan it again for me?" Um, Utopias are great, but then there are other situations where IT slams. They're a 2 or 3 person shop, and you and security are a 1 person shop, and you've all got admin rights, and you see the latest Log4j print nightmare. I'm going to date myself here, but Heartbleed type thing come out, and you're just you're going, oh shoot, maybe a different 4 letter word, and you're the security practitioner that's out there applying patches, and maybe you're just sending FYIs out to the IT team. Hey, I'm going to go reboot this server, reboot this infrastructure because some big problem came out that if we don't fix it now, it's going to result in 10 big problems later. So there's that ideological state of racy definitions and everything, and then there's everything in between, right, Tim?
Yeah, and that was actually the next thing I was going to touch on is building out who the RACI model, right? Who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed, right? I've definitely felt that side of it where the IT team is slammed. They're working at their own pace. The security team has those administrative rights, and they can get out there to start pushing patches.
Mm-hmm.
But should they, right? Kind of, there's a balance of that risk of one patch not being applied in a timely manner, or a 0 day coming out and needs to be more rapidly resolved, right? So that's where having a RACI can definitely smooth a lot of that over of who needs to just know, right? If the legal team needs to know of us patching this, I don't know, CVSS score of like 9, right? We can let them know, but or the patch management team can let them know. But it's something that just needs to be staged in a way that people can refer back to it, know who and what and when and where they need to do their that task.
I will say if you're doing work on analysis and you don't want to get stuck in paralysis, if you're going to spend time analyzing something and putting structure around something, getting that RACI defined ahead of having to patch the latest 0 day, or maybe not a 0 day, but even just a structured patch release, and understanding who is doing what, that's probably the best quick and dirty 30 minutes. In depth, you could get into 3 or 4 hours with this, depending upon the size of the organization. But just getting down on paper who's got the commands at what time and at what point in the process is going to do wonders for you. And it doesn't need to be 20-page documents and 50-row Excel sheets and things like that. Something as simple as saying, hey, when these types of rated things come out, CVE 10s come out, I've got it. I'll handle those. I'll put in emergency changes, or maybe we don't have change control and I just do it on a Friday night. Getting that understood among the team and ideally written down in some form or another to say, hey, IT handles it in these situations, I handle it in these other situations, can save a lot of finger pointing later. It can save a lot of nothing happening when I thought they were doing something and they thought I was doing something,
Right.
and nobody does anything. Or vice versa, you end up double impacting the business because it was so bad. And there was a time at a certain organization that I worked for where we would block CIOmagazine.com on the proxies because the number of fire drill calls I got on a Saturday night because my CIO read the latest CIO magazine article and it said that he should be freaking out about something. There's any number of things that may come up, and if they're spamming, a leadership member is spamming the organization to say, hey, what's going on? And Jacob doesn't respond in 5 minutes, but boy, security better be on call 24/7, right? Never mind that I was eating dinner or driving, safety be damned, right? So that leader starts polling the director of infrastructure, not only the head of security, director of infrastructure, and then the head of data, and maybe this had something to do with application. So now I'm pinging the head of application development. And then all four of us jump in because we're all responding to that leader in one go. And we're all doing this thing at the same time. There can be pretty big impact to trying to, especially in more customizable systems like Linux and Unix type things, to double applying patches, double compiling things, breaking servers in the middle of a compile. It doesn't go well, right? So sorting those things out ahead of time that says, hey, if it's this type of server, I act, or there's many angles you can take on it. Getting that in its most basic form written down ahead of time as part of your do something model is great value return. If you're truly working from a ground up, whether greenfield or brownfield, a ground up build, that's some of the first steps you should be taking. But Tim, you'd mentioned a little bit about some frameworks earlier as well. Do you want to hit on that a bit more?
Yes, yes. So the kind of the framework discussion is has to do with, well, a couple steps back. The next thing I wanted to touch on was asset inventory. So knowing what assets you have, what operating systems they're running, things like that. And then from there, prioritization of specific assets, right? So I don't know, web server that runs front end web details, that kind of needs to be up all the time, whether it's behind a load balancer or not, different story. But that would have a high priority based on it being externally facing. So kind of
Right.
Determining multipliers based on types of systems, types of vulnerabilities, and then using that information to appropriately address the order of patching or maintaining those systems. At a high level, this is a framework, right? EVOTEK has some guidance as well around kind of building something like this out, where you have your asset inventory, you identify the systems that are more critical, less critical, or not critical at all. But I mean, someone's using a system, so it does need to have some availability, and then working through the patching of those systems.
And it's interesting. There's a reason asset inventory has been number one on the CIS list for like 20 years now. We still don't seem to have identified that and figured out a really great way for everybody to do this and be good at it. But again, this is another spectrum scenario where doing something is better than doing nothing. So in today's model of do something, even if you don't have a full asset inventory and all you're doing is walking around talking to your stakeholders to find the most important assets to them, and what's important to Tim, the engineer, is different than what's important to Jacob, the CISO, is different than what's important to Mike, the head of marketing, right? Tim, you might be most worried about automation and control systems. I might be most worried about governance systems, and Mike over there might be most worried about our public-facing website systems. They're all important, and it's not an exhaustive asset inventory by a long shot, but protecting the most critical assets to the company and to its key operators is even a step in the right direction for asset inventory. And again, we're not patching everything, but in extreme situations and against even moderate to advanced threats, if if your engineering systems are patched against that, then they have a better likelihood, better probability of staying online in extreme breach scenarios. Again, we didn't get that one server on the perimeter that nobody knew about that resulted in a breach, but Tim's servers can still have a better probability, I should say, of being online and being able to respond to that. From a governance and oversight perspective as the CISO, I've got the ability to look at uptime and look at impact systems and look at other critical metrics and reports that might strategically help me make better decisions around how to respond to things. And being up and online in the accounting division can help us to communicate to our consumer base. In the marketing division can help us communicate with our consumer base to say, we know something's going on. Our website is up to say, this is how we're responding. We've partnered with this firm. We're working with outside agencies. So the ability to have those most critical types of systems, regardless of why they are critical, is a great place to start when it comes to asset inventory. And a lot of folks can go, oh, I need a ServiceNow, or I need a Tanium, or I need a TAC to get asset inventories going. Do something. Use a damn Excel sheet to write down the most important servers. And even if you go back to Mike and Tim and Jacob once every 3 months and go, hey, these 5 assets you said were most important to you, has that changed in the last 3 months? Oh yeah, that one got shut down. We don't do that business line anymore. And I added a new one over here. That's enough to get started. That's enough to get you to do something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And kind of the next piece that I want to jump into is kind of maturing, right? So
Yeah.
once you have kind of that framework in place, you need to there's a continuous improvement, right? There's um, checkpoints, check-ins, time to time. Hey, what's changed? What's new? Um, and moving through that. The another big piece of it is you mentioned like ServiceNow and some other ways to build out a CMDB, right? So you have all of your systems, or you're working through gathering your systems, but um, doing some sort of review, whether it be programmatically or through an Excel sheet or whatever, to identify the the new systems or systems that haven't been seen in a while. So that way you uh, can appropriately kind of monitor and manage those, right? It's um, kind of ongoing effort, right? You just
Mhm.
keep putting more and more things in there, not to make it more and more complex, but once you've understood where certain systems exist, right, you kind of just keep moving that path forward.
Right. You see, oh, I've got 5 critical systems out here in a DMZ. Maybe I should see what else is in that DMZ. And it's not always for purchase solutions. A lot as I speak a lot, as I advise a lot, as I work even internally. I've flopped back and forth between corporate side and consulting side. Even as I'm internal, I get a lot of feedback that says, we don't really have a lot to invest in this space, or you got to wait for the next budget cycle, and maybe you don't want to wait. Unlucky you, it just happened last month, so you don't want to wait 11 months to even start to talk about investment, and then the 3-4 months to deploy a product, and those manner of things. Next thing you know, it's 18 months out, and you've got vulnerabilities to handle in the meantime. There's the wonderful thing about open source. In the majority of environments, there are certain environments where open source isn't permitted, but there are great free tools to help you do network walks, and some limited time with Google or ChatGPT these days. I can't have a session without mentioning ChatGPT. But there's a plethora of opportunities out there to, after you've done something and now you want to start doing something a little bit smarter, to walk your network, to organize your data, to automate some very simple tasks up front about reporting and metrics and things of that nature. There's a plethora of free opportunities and tools out there, and using those as stepping stones to demonstrate value return to your board, to your executive team, to your leadership in general, are great opportunities to say, look, as we've taken a zero cost approach to this, we've knocked out 40% of our vulnerabilities, or even on these critical systems, we've knocked out 80%, and there's markedly less risk associated with these critical systems, but you still have ancillary and tertiary risk. There's other assets around it. Boy, Mr. Mrs. Boss, I need a little bit of money now to go and do that. And look at what I've done with $0, but we're really bumping up against the ceiling of what we can do with $0. And now we need even some nominal investment. And you'll spend enough time in any sized organization doing something with nothing,
Right.
to give you time to prepare to do something with something more. So as you get into that maturity space, and you start looking at an inventory between your antivirus console and an inventory between your Active Directory, right? Those are two great
Totally.
asset sources, and you start comparing the two. You might be doing it in Excel at first, and then maybe you get a little bit of investment, and now you can add Qualys or Tenable or Rapid7 or something. Rapid7 is always expensive, but you can add a vulnerability scanner to the mix and get a third source and start to bump those out into a pretty respectable asset inventory, right? And now all of a sudden, because you've done something with nothing, you've got an opportunity here now to start to build on that from a maturity perspective. And before you know it, you've got it's not fancy, it's not a $1 million solution, but all of a sudden you've got a quasi-functional CMDB that you can now start to intelligently analyze and say, okay, this new CVE came in and it affects all Windows systems, but not Unix and not thin clients and not this other thing and this other thing. And now you can start, instead of just trying to spray and pray across all of your assets, you can send a note to IT that says, hey, these 10 systems are affected by this. You don't need to build a package to patch all Windows systems. It's just these 10 that I know about, and let's start there. And
Right.
it can get much more intelligent very quickly. So even that incremental improvement on certain aspects of discovery and upfront analysis can help. And then you start to get into automation. And I'll say, Tim, that's the automation aspect, that's really your space. But getting into
Yeah.
getting into automation gets you to be a force multiplier as a practitioner as well.
Yeah. So one piece back to the discovery side. A lot of the vulnerability assessment tools you can feed in, like you can crawl your network. You do find that some systems have firewalls turned on, which is great, but also challenging, right? Because now you can't see that it's there. So you can utilize additional tooling that you might already have, whether it be your EDR, EPP, where hey, you can run a report of unmanaged systems, right? It's really doing is scanning the ARP tables of all the systems that are out
Right.
there. But hey, you get IP space, you get sometimes host name, sometimes you get other information, but you can use that to target zones in your network that you might not have had that visibility previously.
Right.
You definitely hit the nail on the head with living in Excel spreadsheets and manually like VLOOKUPs or whatever else.
Use
Like,
what you
hey,
got, baby.
yeah, does this exist elsewhere? And yeah, tools like I don't know, mention ServiceNow or Exonius or something like that, where it's like you can start to really utilize the existing data that's there. So that's pretty good. The automation piece. So I've had some pretty good luck in the past. I say luck, but just it's been enough of improvement within the environments to you get one piece of information, you feed it into another tool, and then
Mhm.
utilize that to scan something else. Where I don't know, very recently, Rapid7 is something that I've utilized, and um, identifying assets through ARP table lookups of
Yep.
where does this exist? Can I run a scanner here?
Get
That's been
creative. Yeah.
yeah,
And
that's
the
been
nice thing when you're using those multiple tools is you've got a rising tide raising all boats, right? So your Rapid7 scanner that's dumping ARC tables out of your routing infrastructure and says, oh, I have all of these VLANs I could go look at. And maybe there's 3 new ones in there, and your Rapid7 tool is discovering in that space and finds 50 new assets. But now you've got your S1 console over here that is missing those entire VLANs, and now that gives you an opportunity to further your S1 deployment. And then you've got S1 over here doing peer discovery, and maybe there's an aspect of that VLAN that for whatever reason your scanner couldn't get to, but peer discovery did. And now you've got 20 new assets here from S1 that you can plug into R7. And you end up with this kind of incremental rise in your asset capabilities and ultimately consistency in your control models. Again, all without, it's just intelligent thought. It's creativity as an engineer, and we all kind of have this creativity gene in us, despite being engineering focused, to get creative with what you got. And if you can use those same solutions to better the efficacy of other solutions, those are great opportunities to be able to rise all boats across that one tide.
right. Yeah. So the remediation aspect of it, I've definitely been guilty of
Mhm.
uh, using a tool to solve a problem that it was not designed for or intended for
Yeah.
anyway. I've utilized EDR tools to remotely patch systems that aren't on the company network and
Right.
are at someone's house, and it's just like you do what you can with what you have, and in some cases,
You learn from them. Yeah.
it worked out really well in this situation because it for whatever reason that the patching solution wasn't available on that system at that time. But
Right.
EDR is always talking to the cloud, and you can
Yeah, and
use
maybe
that.
at home I've got a site to site set up. It's that's always on, but maybe I'm visiting grandma's house over Christmas and that's not available, right? So you get creative with what you have and you build multiple layers. And I'm just looking at the chat here. It's Matt's hit on a point that I really love is you spend all this time preparing for something and something comes along and you fix that issue, you dodge that bullet, and all of a sudden you're lucky. Well, it's like, oh, I got lucky and now I'm good at this. And never mind that we spent the last 7 years trying to get good at it. Nobody remembers that part, right? So,
Yeah.
in that frame and in the frame of maturity, it's a journey to be undergone. And back to the original point, it's not vulnerability management is not off and on. You're not doing it or not doing it. It's a spectrum in between. And it's as you get into some of the later maturity and you really get into incremental improvements, the target rich environment that you had before for automation capabilities and the opportunities to do something with nothing start to get thinner and thinner. And you either have to get more creative or you have to be able to begin to influence and demonstrate value across the organization. And you really get out of the environment or the circumstance that allows you to make a huge impact with nominal effort, and you really have to become more calculated with the effort that you put in and where the value is going to be perceived and whether or not it's providing actual value across the vulnerability program. Outside of vulnerability management, there's a million other domains that we operate in. There's at least 19 of them, right? There's a bunch of other domains that we operate in that maybe need more attention than vulnerability management. But so you have to make those decisions as you go. But even getting into incremental improvement can really take a toll on teams. And it's really easy for me at the CISO tier to say keep going, but that has a pretty big impact on individual teams to individual players and the creativity and the engineering capability that's necessary to just keep going and keep doing more. And you eventually run into this diminishing return. And that has impacts on individual team members. I'm sure Tim, you've seen this over the years, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Like the ability for someone to kind of hit that limit and experience burnout, right?
Yeah,
How do you, like, someone does really good work and the reward for that good work is more
it's more
money,
work.
right?
You're a victim of your own success. I think
Yeah.
I've done this to you before, maybe, but I don't know.
Maybe. But it's not just in vulnerability management. It's just kind of IT in general, right? Teams
Mhm.
are do really well at deploying VMs and maintaining those and whatever else. And it's just like, okay, well, now we need now we need to do more, right?
Mhm.
And um, kind of on the business side, there's it's not always observed that someone is experiencing burnout, right? On
Right.
the CISO side, where like you work with your team pretty well and you want them to let you know when they have problems, and they might not, but they might let another
Yeah.
teammate know, hey, I just can't do this right now, right? So
And
communication
there's
on that level is super
yeah,
important.
you hit the nail on the head with the communication piece there. And as we talk about vulnerability management and you realize there's a lot of technical bits here. There's a lot of platforming and process. And they say that the key to any successful program is people, process, and tech, right? And a lot of times we forget about the first aspect there, and it's the people side of things. And sometimes these are easy to pick up on when you're in small teams. I recently did security for a nationwide burger chain. You can Google me and find out. But they were a small but mighty team, half a dozen players in that space. And in the day-to-day run of things, you can run into all six of those people and have one-on-ones with those people and understand what's going on. What are you working on? How are you doing? And how is that affecting the efficacy of your program? If Tim's got a bouncing baby girl coming along and I know that he's gonna need to spend more time in that space at home, then I focus efforts elsewhere. And you kind of balance the softer side of these things. But you get into large shops. Tim, we've worked together in major corporations, right, where
Oh,
my staff alone was over 100 people. The corporate security team in large was over 1,000 individuals. So there's no way I could spend all day, every day doing one-on-ones and in a 2 week period, not get to all 100 and plus individuals, right? And those are just people that are on my direct team, let alone somebody that works on an ancillary but highly supportive, highly related team. I might be focused on architecture and engineering, but that, and I depend very heavily on operations and engineering, right? So, they're not my account, but what I do and what I say and the things that I require of the organization may have lasting impact across the teams, and that affects the efficacy of your program. And there's even the other people side of things. We're talking a little bit about the people here and incremental improvements, and humility is a funny thing as we talk about efficacy of vulnerability management programs and such. One thing that I think engineering teams, and it's just by nature of their work, it's not an engineer's job description, so to speak, to communicate to the board or to communicate to the president or CEO of a company. They're specially trained and highly skilled in one area, and it's not within their, we can't do everything despite jack of all trades, master of several. We can't expect somebody to be in all of these roles all at once. So they don't get exposed to certain aspects of vulnerability management programs and really around business risk management. So, we're talking about doing something with nothing here, and then maturity, and then incremental improvement. And as you start to get into those increments, you need money, and you need investment, and you need tone at the top. And I've run into this a lot with my engineers in the past, where they say, look, I just don't understand how the board and the C-suite does not understand how important this is. And we've got perimeter servers that are open exposed to all the craziness on the internet, and there's 10 critical vulnerabilities, and I just don't have enough staff to go and address these things as they're coming up. And 6 people managing 200 assets, maybe that's not a problem, but you get 6 people managing 50,000 assets, and 1,000 of those are perimeter facing. You could spend all 6 of those people addressing vulnerabilities on the perimeter, and you still don't have enough time to get all of those, let alone the inside, let alone the rest of operations that you have to run. So that incremental improvement becomes nigh impossible after a little while, and they just kind of pull their hair out, as you can't tell. They pull their hair out going, how the hell is this not super clear to somebody at the top? And I think where engineers and even some CISOs, regrettably, can fall a little bit short in this space. And bear with me understanding that ignorance is different than stupidity. If you're ignorant to a circumstance, you just don't understand it. You're not exposed to it, and you don't operate in that angle of thinking. And I find a lot of my engineers over the years have had difficulty in understanding why does a CEO not think that, or a CFO not think that funding in this space is important. I've asked for it 5 times and I've been denied 5 times, but those yokels over in marketing, boy, they keep throwing more money their way, or out in operations or something, they got another widget that they already have
more
10 of.
headcount.
Or headcount, just in general expanding operations. And it's important to remember, as you're going through and doing something with vulnerability management, that you're tackling a pool of risk for your business. And at some point, you reach an optimization level with your vulnerability management program where additional investment, as I said, or additional headcount or additional something is necessary to expand the impact of that program and expand the risk mitigation that you achieve out of vulnerability management. And this, again, I'd mentioned falling short of and ignorance and things of that nature, but where security engineers or our security teams in general may not have line of sight to the rest of the business is there's risk everywhere. Tim, you and I were talking not that long ago about my ventures in the burger factory. There was a material, we all talk about enterprise risk registers. There was a material risk on the enterprise risk register that said, we don't have cheese for cheeseburgers. And that somebody had done some math somewhere, it was reputable, that was going to affect an 18% hit in our revenue. And you sit down and you go, boy, it's just cheese. Well, it turns out a lot of Americans like cheese on their burgers. So I'm not necessarily going to buy a burger if it doesn't come with the kind of cheese I want. Maybe I'll order a pizza or I'll go somewhere else because it's not what I'm craving in that moment, right? So, to a CEO, to a CFO, to a board, there's more than just vulnerability risk out there, and understanding there's more than even just IT risk and infrastructure risk if you take vulnerability management in its broadest stroke. And being aware of that and setting your own expectations, I think, can save engineers, it can save operators, it can save CISOs a ton of burnout that stems from frustration. Where you're just banging your head against the wall, going, "Why is this not getting more eyes on it?" And having the humility to say, "Oh, there might be risk elsewhere in the business. There might be, the business is going to invest $1, and what do they get out of that? Do they get $5 of risk avoidance, or do they get $10 of revenue opportunity out of deploying a new widget or a new item? Or, there's been 1,000% growth in this department, and if I add a new headcount there, I might get 1,100% growth now." Those types of things, and understanding that there's a broader risk picture, there's an enterprise approach to things, and this applies to very small businesses all the way up to Fortune 10s.
Yeah.
This the same kind of model of what bang do I get for my buck is something that business leaders focus on. And if we can get some of our engineers, we can get, I would hope, our CISOs to recognize that they are risk oriented first, and stop worrying so much about fiefdom building and getting dollars into their pieces. I'll tell you some of the, just in closing here, one of the biggest impacts I had at a prior employer is, we're sitting in budget discussions, and somebody said, I think I got funding for DLP. It was a $250,000 investment. Great, it came with 2 headcount, all kinds of licensing. It was going to solve my DLP problems. But over here I saw IT having new internet pops cut, and that was going to significantly impact across the country sites' abilities to have timely access to the internet. And we were an internet-based company, so that meant pretty big productivity impacts. That's risk to availability versus my risk to confidentiality, right? And we mentioned earlier the CIA triad and recognizing risk across that. There was a moment there where I said, look, the risk associated with my DLP solution is far less than the risk of stable internet connectivity over here in Mr. IT's land. And hey, that does great. It shows enterprise-wide risk awareness. But I'll tell you, at the same time, handing money over to the IT department for them to solve some of their problems, that comes back your way as well, right? Now my patching solution is more effective because I can
Right.
get trickle patches down to sites faster. And there are other gains when you invest in other parts of the business, and understanding the value that that can provide to the efficacy of a vulnerability management program, to setting your expectations to avoid burnout, and really just ride your business wave and understand what the whole business is after, will really help our security practitioners be much more effective in what the value they're bringing to the organization, and being perceived as innovators and problem solvers than just the security guy or the department of no, or a lot of those old cliches that we have. So Tim, with that was quite a bit around the business side of things. But anything else you have before we maybe jump into some Q&A here, if we have any?
So the last thing about just kind of those incremental improvements, kind of just establishing baseline, right?
Yeah.
New systems as they come on, um, uh, the tools that are out there, free, paid, etc. You can definitely
Mhm.
run these sorts of scans. New systems come online, perform baseline, just to ensure that they meet those minimum requirements
Yeah.
before really being able to be used on the network, right? It definitely cuts down on the last second scramble. Oh shoot, vulnerability scanner found this, or oh, like there's a 0-day that we patched 1,000 other systems on, but this one
Yeah.
just came online and
Yeah. And it's
it's
still there.
still there. So yeah, so the uh, just having those baselines, and it could be as simple as if automation exists for building systems, just gets patched
Move
at
it.
that time,
Yeah.
or I mean, there's tons of ways to solve the problem, but that's a big piece of not stepping on your own feet.
Yeah, and using, getting, back to the ounce of prevention, pound of cure piece. If you've solved this, update your images. You're going to use them again. So, it might take you 15 minutes to update an image, and it might take you 15 minutes to apply the patch, but you're going to apply that patch more than one time, right? So
Yeah,
if you can invest 15 minutes now and save hundreds of minutes later, that's time you could be spending tackling unpredicted vulnerabilities in 0 days and things like that. Getting into the Q&A piece here, Matt had asked about personal experiences in contextualization and how, what methodology you might use for contextualizing something to your environment, and how you might address vulnerabilities in that way. Tim, I'll start with you. Anything in that space for you?
Yeah, it kind of comes back to the baselining area, but pretty big efforts of legacy applications that are out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk about Flash, right? It's out there. It's still out there. Like even if it gets
20
gone,
years later, it's
it's
still
out
there.
there. Yeah, and there's some pretty nasty like exploits that can be used against it. So
Yeah.
um, it's not difficult to get rid of. Well, in most cases, once I say that, it's not. There's some difficulty there, but
Bold
it's not difficult to
statement.
get rid of. But realistically, it's like those that one application that is back level, whatever, could have 8,000 vulnerabilities assessed against it from a scanner, right? So one patch or one removal of an application, huge dip in kind of a risk score against one asset or a collection of assets. And if you are able to automate that out, and you can have a gigantic impact against the environment.
Yeah. And speaking of impacts and in the context of contextualization, first.org, they're the publishers for CVSS scoring. You've got CISA that has recently published their own guidance on contextualization. In our theme today of do something, we talked a little bit about how building asset inventories identifies your critical assets and things like that. With some basic engineering understanding and how your network is laid out, you can bucketize assets. And how vulnerabilities are effectuated against an organization is very critical. If you break down, everybody says, "Oh, this was a 10, or this was a 9, or an 8, or a 7, or a 2, or an informational, or critical." If you go behind the scenes and you pull up first.org or CISA, or reach out to me. My information is public. I can give you the math equations that those organizations use to make those calculations. They're all public access. You can look them up yourself as well, but understand how a vulnerability is exacerbated and how a threat actor is going to use that. Is it network based, or do they have to be standing in front of a system? Do I have to prompt a user, or can I do it behind the scenes? These
Right.
are all huge things that affect different types of assets. And I'll give you a couple of examples. If you've got something that requires physical access to exacerbate, you have to plug something in, or you have to manipulate a power button, or some other means of physical access to a device to exacerbate something. Maybe you don't have to care about the fact that it's sitting on the perimeter of your network. You really want to care more about the physical controls that are in place at your data center. Vice versa, if something is network based, but you've got an offline asset that you have to physically walk up to use something. It's completely air gapped. There's literally no network cable in the back of that. It's a self-contained fat client that's doing analytics. Then maybe you don't care about applying a network-based attack patch to that particular system, and you can spend that time working on something else. Mutually, if you've got a network-based attack system, maybe you start patching your perimeter systems first. And you've got things internally that say, hey, I've got 4 firewalls in the way and a bunch of other comm controls that look at network aspects. You can patch those systems later. Start with the things that are most exposed for attack vectors, and you'll go huge realms in that. And we talked a little bit about the asset stuff and bucketizing. Bucketize your Windows systems. Bucketize major characteristics, where they're at on the network. Are they user interactive systems, or is it a server that nobody ever really directly interacts with and it's behind the scenes? Understanding how assets are used and where they're physically located, and marrying that with an understanding of how attacks are executed and vulnerabilities are exacerbated will go a long way in helping you determine where to start first in those like emergency style situations. And really, in many cases, if you can get formulaic about it, you may even be able to completely disregard applying patches to certain systems in total, if something is only designed to affect data integrity, but you don't care about integrity on those systems, let's say they're thin clients that get burned every day, then you don't have to patch those systems. So leveraging some very basic thought logic can really help you contextualize things. And if you're showing up with a contextualized set of vulnerabilities that's 10% of the workload of non-contextualized vulnerabilities, let's say you're showing up with 100 instead of 1,000, your IT team will be able to work through that and knock down a big piece of risk, focusing on an intelligent 100 than just spray and pray with 1,000. So with
Yeah.
that, Tim, we're over time. I really appreciate you joining me today, the opportunity to come and speak with you. For those that still have questions, reach out to us. We're happy to answer them for you. But outside of that, please head over to the expo booths. There's a lot of great content there from our sponsors, and please enjoy the content for the rest of the sessions today.
Yeah, great. Thanks for joining, everybody. See you in the next session.